Y'all know what it is.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. This week we have special guest, President and CEO of Berkeley Varitronics Systems, best-selling author and sought-after public speaker, Scott Schober. Scott is a relentless scientist, engineer, and innovator. He is the inventor of cell phone detection tools that are used to enforce no cell phone policies worldwide. These instruments are effectively used around the globe to find contraband cell phones smuggled into correctional facilities and corporate offices, in addition to government, military, law enforcement, and other private installations. In addition, Scott is a highly sought-after subject matter expert in the topic of wireless security and cybersecurity for media outlets and public speaking events. He appears regularly on ABC News, Bloomberg TV, CBS This Morning, and CCTV, to name a few. He also presents on visionary issues at conferences around the globe discussing wireless technology and its role in current cybersecurity breaches, along with his vision for best practices for a stay-safe future. Joining us today for an in-depth conversation about how to protect your small business from cyber attack and why cybersecurity is everyone's business. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Scott Schober. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for making time for us. I'm actually really excited for this conversation. So let's get right into it, I guess. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and how you got started in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a brief background. So I'm running a company, Berkeley Varitronics Systems. We're headquartered in central New Jersey, about 40 minutes outside New York City. This year, we're celebrating our 50th year in business. I'm not the original founder. It's actually a family business founded by my father. And companies have always come to us with unique problems, and we come up with some type of solution. And the majority of the stuff that we focus on is always tied to wireless. And we really got deep into wireless in about the mid-1980s, when the first cellular phones and cell towers and everything were built out. We were the guys that the industry came to design test equipment. Basically signal test meters to stimulate a signal and simulate a cell tower, receivers to collect that data and do what's called drive study or propagation analysis, and actually mapping technologies to actually map out the coverage and figure out how in the world can all this wireless stuff work. And we've been doing that ever since through different generations, from the early days of cellular analog to the second generation, third generation, fourth generation, and the transition now we're going into the 5G, fifth generation. So pretty exciting ride. And in the process of all that, we learned a lot about what makes smartphones work, and of course, vulnerabilities and how to exploit them, which brought us quickly into the world of cybersecurity. So really the past 10 years, especially, we've been focusing in on cybersecurity and mostly working with DoD agencies, Fortune 500 companies, and trying to stop wireless threats where somebody could possibly bring a mobile phone into a secure space where they house classified information, and then a whole host of other things, all mostly tied in with wireless technology. So I always say we're kind of at that intersection where cybersecurity crosses wireless, and that's where we come into play, our company. And that got us heavily invested in the world of cybersecurity. And then maybe even more so, maybe about 2015, 2016 timeframe, we started getting targeted, our company, as well as myself personally. And it started out was very innocently, my credit card was compromised. I was like, what is this? Then my debit card, and then the company's credit card, and the company's debit card, and then other officers' cards all got compromised. I'm like, this is too coincidental. And then the next step, my Twitter account got compromised. Then we started receiving repeated Ddos attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, where our website was flooded and we couldn't do any online commerce. And it was one thing after the next, to the point where we had $65,000 stolen out of our checking account. And I said, something's going on here. So I brought in an Israeli firm. They started helping me doing searches in the dark web and figuring out, looking at the traffic, and finally able to actually isolate it and find out there were actually some notorious hackers that basically put a target on my back and were just making life miserable for me, which hence led me into writing my first book, Hacked Again. And I kind of share the tale of being hacked and compromised and some of the things that I learned and the mistakes that I made. And I've used that as a kind of a platform to really help educate other people, especially business owners, that assumed they were secure like I did, but realized quickly that we all can be vulnerable, and we make assumptions that we're secure and we got this, but oftentimes there are things that we do that are not secure. We don't even see it. So it's been an interesting journey, and a lot of the things brought me to where I am, I think, just by going through the painful process of being hacked and compromised.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned in there, obviously, and it's a huge topic, is this idea of hacking. And I wonder if you couldn't take just a brief minute to sort of, I guess, maybe establish definitions for this conversation. So I know there's a broad range of things that get sort of catch-all underneath the term hacking. But do you mind sort of explaining what is a hack, versus, I don't know, your kid getting into your Facebook account?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on, and I too have different views of it. For example, I called hacking the early days of my teenage years, myself and my brother, we hacked. In other words, we did things for fun. We didn't cross the line for monetary gain, I guess. We kind of crossed the line where we were doing mischief. We pirated games. So we would copy every game under the sun for Atari, for Apple. We would go on to the pre-internet days where you would get onto a bulletin board system and work with a system operator and try to hack through the codes to get in to then obtain and steal the games, and then copy them for your buddies and friends and stuff. So that was kind of more of an innocence, I call it. It wasn't, again, for monetary gain, but hacking oftentimes now it's taken on a different light where it's a little bit more causing grief, causing chaos, making people's lives miserable, sometimes for monetary gain, sometimes not. So, it really varies, I think, but usually it's with manipulation of passwords, getting into a system, getting into a computer, in this case, the bank accounts, and causing havoc, Twitter account causing havoc, our online store causing havoc. So that's kind of how I refer to it as being hacked.
Yeah, I wonder if, just as sort of an add-on to, just to sort of give people a little additional context on hacking, I think we have this concept that there's some guy sitting in a dark room someplace with his sunglasses on in the dark, and he's hacking us, right? This guy he's viciously attacking us through his computer. Are people always involved? Is it sometimes just robots? Can we just sort of establish, I guess, just to broaden our definition of hacking?
Yeah, I think it's actually both, because you can commandeer an army of botnets to do, as I mentioned before, if you want to do a DDoS attack. How are a lot of the modern DDoS attacks happening? It's often botnet attacks. 100,000 IP cameras that have the default password and username in there that they download some specific code to, and at a certain time they'll all be told, hey, go attack this particular URL and just flood it with junk traffic. So there's an example of a DDoS attack that really doesn't have much human intervention at all. And a lot of the things I find, they're orchestrated, they come out of the dark web. So in other words, these are different individuals. Most of them are hackers, cyber criminals of one sort or another, and they kind of work together. So there's a human element of shared information and learning that can be applied to those that are targeting individuals or targeting companies. And that's the part that's kind of scary. There's a lot of that kind of smoke and mirrors where it's not that clearly discernible who is the person at the other end behind it. As you mentioned, it's not always the guy sitting in the basement drinking his 2-liter bottle of Coke in a hoodie. Although that's what the movies portray. This could be somebody that could be the guy next door. It could be a cyber criminal in Romania, Russia, China, could be in the US. We don't know. And that's part of the challenge because, again, oftentimes they do work in the world of the dark web where it gives a level of anonymity and difficult to actually track down individuals. And part of the fallout when I was hacked and hacked again was I was collecting a lot of information about individuals they kind of tease you, and they would say things to disparage your name or question your validity of a comment you might make or an article you write, an interview you do, whatever the case may be. Some of them were actually those of the group Anonymous and other groups. And I only found that out is because I fed the different names and things and did some research, and their names popped up in a lot of chatter on the dark web. So when you start putting together the bigger pieces as a puzzle, then it starts to get a lot clearer. And you could say, okay, yes, it was not an isolated instance or somebody that had a grievance. This is somebody or a group that was going after me. And then later on, I found out, I guess I'm not alone. When I talk to others, like colleagues in the industry, the Kevin Mitnicks of the world, the Brian Krebs, who's a great researcher and reporter on it, they had similar stories to share, that they too were targeted and suffered many similar type of things. So I guess I'm in good company. Maybe it's a form of flattery. I don't know, but it is scary because it's never that crystal clear. It's so different when somebody robs your house and they catch the guy and you see him and they go to court and they go to jail and so on and so forth. With cybersecurity, it's not that crystal clear, and that could bother a lot of people. And I think it does often.
So, I listened to a podcast called Darknet Diaries, and it's all about cybersecurity. It talks about DDoS attacks and botnets and all the fun stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And I don't think a lot of people actually know what like a botnet is and how it works, and how your computer can actually be serving the needs of some guy in Ukraine, or hot topic right now, serving some guy across the world, and he's managing 1 million computers and sending billions of emails through your personal private computer. Can you maybe talk about botnets, how they work, like how we can maybe detect them, see if they're on our machines, and if they are, how we can prevent them from keep working?
Yeah, I think there are different types of botnets too. You mentioned something where somebody might take over your computer in the background, so they could actually put malicious code malware on your computer that will have some scripts and other things hidden in directories. You'll never see them. Your computer's running a little slow and you're kind of wondering what's going on here. It's just not right. Yet your computer could be used to actually orchestrate, be part of a cyber attack. And that's actually how they do it. The most common thing you can tell if it's happening, obviously, if it's running slow, things aren't loading right, that could be 10 other things also, but that's a common cause. If your computer's just running slow, you could look at some of the resource managers sometimes and see how is your CPU being pulled? Is it being used for a lot of different tasks, and what specifically are there? If I drill down, I could start to learn a lot of things and then try to isolate it. The other thing that can be very confusing now is your computer can also often be taken over by somebody doing crypto mining. And it's got very similar characteristics as if it's being used for, a botnet type of attack where they're launching like a DDoS attack or something. So similar things tells that you might actually determine if you're doing some investigation on it. A lot of the things now that people are doing, though, is at the server level, it can actually be stopped based upon where you're actually, who's hosting your website and your email server and all that other stuff. So hardware can actually help. And there are individual devices. And I've actually bought some technology, and this sits before the pipe coming into our building, and real-time analysis. It can actually look at the traffic. So you could look at things such as incoming emails to see if they're a simple innocent spam email, but it's got attachments in it. And maybe it's a strain for something for ransomware or some other type of malicious code. So there's lots of different ways to handle it. A lot of the software that's being used doesn't stop enough things for obvious reasons, because a lot of these are 0 days and things are popping up all the time. It can't keep up. But some of the hardware approaches are kind of interesting. It's a reverse type of concept where you've got, imagine hundreds of thousands of hardware boxes out there that every day are getting real-time updates of the latest threats. And now they know how to contend against them and to stop them. And they'll basically sandbox it and allow all legit traffic to go through. So botnets kind of work the opposite way, where they're all sitting there waiting, and it could be a computer, but more oftentimes it's some of these mass-produced cameras, IP cameras that are mass-produced in China. And they're easy to remote access as long as you know the address. They're not secure. They could then be used. So the market's flooded with them, millions of them. And now you can actually know this list of these specific IP addresses and load them up with code, so you can launch a very specific focused attack, such as DDoS attack. I should point out, a lot of people think it's extremely expensive or sophisticated. Not necessarily. You can go on the dark web. I can hire a cyber criminal about $7 to launch a focused DDoS attack against a target. And so I may say, hey, for 1 hour, I want you to target this website. So they'll actually launch that attack on your behalf, and you pay them, $7 equivalent in Bitcoins, which is like a billionth of a Bitcoin, I guess. And then they can go attack this person. So it doesn't necessarily require you to be knowledgeable or to be, a cybersecurity expert or a cyber criminal. You can hire people to do these things. And that to me is one of the most concerning things. And I think it's opened up the floodgates, because there's a lot of people that might have a beef against a particular company, their competitor, another country, a political regime, targeting a celebrity, who knows? But it allows people, the average guy or girl, to just hire somebody to go orchestrate these attacks. And I think that's part of the problem and why they're so prevalent and they're so hard to detect.
So,
sorry, Mike.
Oh, yeah. Is there anything you can really do against a DDoS attack? I know that I host my domains at Cloudflare, and I use them for that specific purpose. But as a normal regular Joe, there's not really anything you can really do to stop that, can you?
There's not a lot you could do for the average guy, but certainly depending upon who's hosting, they have a lot of provisions there will actually prevent it. Like Cloudflare, you mentioned. A lot of people are using AWS and other sites that are really good at stopping these DDoS attacks. And a lot of times, I think it's who you work with is what's really important. If you're just a simple mom and pop and you have a simple WordPress site you threw together and you're hosting from, company ABC because it's cheap, you might be more prone to it. Not much you can do to stop it. All the stuff that we hear, typically it's after the fact that people learn about. They don't even realize it. They think, oh, well, my broadband provider is having some communication issues and the thing's down. I can't sell anything on my online site. What's going on? They kind of are pointing fingers and wondering who it is. And in the end, when you actually do a little post investigation, yeah, it was a DDoS attack. But it's not that easy to tell. Other than some of the tells, as I mentioned there, things aren't running right, things are running slow, the phone's ringing, customers are complaining. The more obvious, those are things that tell you it's a problem. But as far as to your point, what can you do to solve it? There's not a lot, unfortunately. There's not a lot of stuff out there yet. There's some companies that are starting to introduce some products, both, again, hardware, but also some software things that's analyzing the traffic, that's starting to help and raise the red flags. But we've still got a long way to go, because you see how prevalent DDoS attacks are still out there.
Yeah, no, makes sense. I wanted to ask you though, so given, we've discussed a couple of the common sorts of hacks or sorts of attacks that are going on nowadays, but what are some of the most prevalent attacks going on, in this time that people maybe just aren't even aware of? So you mentioned maybe we don't know we're getting hit with like a DDoS attack, for example. But are there, really obvious things that are going on that maybe are just going over the heads of most people?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Some things I talk about, and still to this day, I've been talking about it for years, and people give me a look like deer in a headlight. I talk about keyloggers. And that's when more and more people in the world of cybersecurity are aware of them. But probably the average person, they still look at you and say, what are you talking about? I don't know what that is, or never heard of it. And a keylogger is simply, again, if a particular strain of malware gets onto your computer or your smartphone, even, they're targeting those as well, and laptops, iPads, you name it. And every keystroke that you basically make, it will actually record it. It logs it. And then later on, it will dump it out. And it's typically going to be a text file or something. They'll parse it and they'll pull out the key information, such as if you're logging into your bank, for example, they'll see the bank name and other things in the URL and your username, your password, your security challenge questions, whatever else that you typed in. So why do I say that? It's important to have a anti-keylogger. And that's simply software that could be on your device that will encrypt every keystroke that you make. But there's something that a lot of people, and I've heard this again and again, they say, well, I have my Yahoo email password compromised, and I went on and created a new password, and 5 minutes later, they hacked into the thing and took over my account again. How could they even do that? Did they hack Yahoo again? Well, they probably started by hacking Yahoo, and then your password wasn't safe and it was in clear text and somebody got it. But maybe the second or third time that it was compromised, maybe it's because there's a keylogger on your computer. Could be. But those type of things I think are important to look at the entire ecosystem, how you handle and manage your personal information. And that allows you to do a better job to actually start securing it. And we talk about passwords. I've talked about passwords till my eyes are blurry sometimes. We're all sick of it. I know. But people still do not create long passwords that are strong. And even worse than that, which is kind of bothersome to me, the other layers of security that really make a difference, like multi-factor, two-factor authentication, they just don't use it. It's not convenient. It takes too long, I hear people say. They reuse the same password across multiple login sites. A recent survey I was reading, I think it was yesterday, they looked at all these compromised accounts, and they dug in and they analyzed how many of those accounts used reused passwords across multiple sites. It said 76% in that particular research that they did. That's crazy. That 76% of those compromised accounts were passwords used in multiple sites. So people still are not getting it. They're not doing enough, which is part of the problem. They're writing passwords down on a sticky note. That's not good. I literally, before I jumped on this call, somebody asked me for a password to write down. We put it on a sticker so they could get into the one particular system in our company. And I said, wait a second, where are you going to put the sticker? I'm like, what do you mean? I'm going to put it on the wall. I'm like, stop. No, don't stick it there so somebody could see it. Oh, well, it's in a locked office. No one will get in. I said, yeah, but what if the cleaning person comes in? Or what if this, what if that? So you have to really think ahead a few steps. We're still the problem, humans. And the common sense, dumb things that we do, because we think it won't happen to me or no one else will see it. That's where cyber criminals use that to their advantage. And we don't realize that again and again.
Yeah, I just went through a software development boot camp. So I did a 12-week program. And one thing that people might not even realize as well is if you're on a Zoom call and you're doing a screen share, there's so much information that you can get just off of looking at someone's browser or on their desktop that they don't realize is there, or, just simple stuff like that. You really kind of almost have to be aware of everything that you're doing at every time when you're online. Just a simple screen share with a friend or with a group of people could compromise your everything. So
that's a great point. I saw that firsthand once. And I'll show you, I was doing an interview similar to this, a video conference call. The person at the other end was in a studio, and they also had a credit card machine there in the background. And on it, I could just make out the actual code that's used for a refund that was on a sticky note on the credit card machine. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, wow, how dangerous could that be, getting that into the wrong hands for somebody dishonest? Because now they could basically refund and put money into any credit card account they want if they got that magic code. So all of us, I think, have been guilty of things like that, maybe not to that degree over time. But I think just having that good common sense, I call it cyber hygiene and best practices. If we're all striving to do that, I think we'll be 100 times more secure. It's just educating people and now getting them to implement it into their lives, not just talking about, you got to make a long, strong password. And even password managers, I always tell people, have you considered using a password manager? Okay, I know you hate passwords. You hate making them long and strong. But if they're not long and strong, then they're not going to be secure. So just understanding that and finding a good system down to manage them. I've got over 200 passwords, and I have to use a hybrid because I can't remember them all. And I have to use a good password manager and a good keychain system for certain things. And for really secure ones, I do old school. I'm guilty of this, and people laugh at me, but it works. I take a password, I write it down in a black book, keep it in a locked safe, locked office, locked building, alarm, and cameras. It's old school, but guess what? It works. There's no way that anybody could electronically intercept that or over the internet or any other means. So for me, for really secure ones, it does actually work. It's not convenient. It's one of the dumbest things in the world. And everybody says, well, what do you do if you got to do this or that? I said, you're out of luck. You got to go back and go through the layers of security to have access to that. So certain things, it makes your life miserable, but it really does work in keeping secure. So I live on that line where I'm a little bit paranoid with certain things. And I find that's the only way to do it, is to properly manage passwords in my life based upon what access and security level that these are at.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I wonder if we could talk about this, sort of a multi-phase question, I guess. Yeah. So I know that you've done some writing on, the staying, cyber safe as a older person, right, in your golden years. And then there's also the version of people who are young and coming into technology now. And I think that there's for older people, it seems, if I'm just being stereotypical and generalizing, it seems to me that there's maybe a lack of knowledge or a lack of foundational information for seniors. But I think there's a over evaluation of young people's ability to use technology, that they're somehow really good at it just because they've grown up with it. And so I wonder if you could sort of compare and contrast the types of problems that you're seeing among seniors, and if they're still happening in younger people, or if there's a different set of problems for the younger people.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there is kind of two different camps of that I have observed. And fortunately, I think I could speak to it from the standpoint of, I have two teenagers that are tech savvy. And then also I have aging parents with some health conditions, and my grandparent, and I talk a lot about that in my book, Senior Cyber. But seeing it first from the senior perspective, my frustration was helping seniors such as my parents and my grandfather and others. It got frustrating because I felt like I was saying the same thing again and again each weekend. No, that's not how you do that. Hold on, let me show you. No, here's how you store that password in the password manager. Here's how you do that. And here's what you should do for a security challenge question. And one example of my father, again, who's brilliant, and he's an engineer, and he's been doing this his whole life, has amazing abilities, yet dealing with just passwords alone. He created in one particular login, his username and his password was one and the same. I said, I don't even think that's possible. How could you do it? He goes, yeah, let me show you. It works for logging on. I just use it. And then I stopped and looked at him. I said, why would you do that? He goes, because I can't remember anything anymore. You run out of sticky notes and pads, and I'm just like, no, we got to get this all organized. This is not the way to do it. There's an example of maybe the extreme, but somebody that's senior that understands it, but so frustrated because there's no simple method. Every website you go to has got different rules. It only accepts an 8-character password, or this one you can't use symbols. This one, finally, people say enough is enough. Who cares? Let me just put, my dog's name in there. And I think that's what starts to happen. Out of getting discouraged, people get to the point where like, enough is enough. Now, with seniors, they're often preyed on because they are more trusting, they are more innocent. Oftentimes they have a work ethic value, and they've actually saved money for their entire life and have a nest egg. So what does it tell a cyber criminal? There's more to steal. So that's why they're often targeted. And when I started dealing with some of these conversations with seniors, I got very frustrated. At the time, my mother-in-law was also in an assisted living facility and trying to help people in the computers and getting on. I said, this is frustrating. There's got to be something here that explains it in maybe a little bit higher level terms. I started doing research, and the few things I found were rather insulting. They talked down to a senior. It just didn't make sense, or talked in tech jargon. So I said, okay, there's nothing out there that, in my opinion, that's going to answer these questions that will encourage seniors to use technology, the internet, smartphones. I'm going to write a book to do it, to help them to break down these barriers. And hence was the start of Senior Cyber. And it took a lot of working with seniors, interviewing seniors, and listening to their frustrations. And I'm sure to some, it may be even a little too technical if somebody's really up there. But for the most part, we tried to speak to that audience. And I think that's, at least from a writing standpoint, it's most important to identify your audience clearly, so you're talking to them and they can relate to it. Some people have written back and told me, you don't go into enough technical details. And I said, good. That's what I want. In that particular case, I didn't want to. Are you a senior? And they're like, well, no, I'm a cybersecurity researcher. I'm like, well, the book's not for you, though. That's for maybe your senior parents or something. So I think that's important when people read things. Books are not for everybody across the board, but understanding how you can best use the material for a targeted audience. Now, to contrast that, another book I'm working on right now, is book number 4, is for teenagers. It is very different, to your point, because teenagers, the assumption is they're tech wizards. They can solve anything, and they're really good with that. However, they tend to be really lax on best practices. And I'll give you a case in point. My kids are both in high school. One of the things to actually get in and look at the grades and other things onto the website, there's a common password. And I said, well, what's the password? I'm thinking it's going to be a long, strong one because you don't want to have people ask. It was pizza. And I'm like, no, seriously, what is the password? And I'm like, no, Dad, that's the password. They all use it. Every kid knows it. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And of course, they had actually their website recently compromised. I wonder why. But sometimes even what's trained early on at school, what kids learn is really not good cyber hygiene. So even though we think they're tech savvy, yeah, they could jump onto Snapchat and Twitter or whatever it is that do all these things quick and dirty, download games. Doesn't mean that they're really using good cyber hygiene and practices. So I think education is really important, especially at a younger age for kids, so they could start learning, hey, there are things that you got to be careful with when you're in the world of cyber and when you're using the internet and computers.
Yeah. And that's the example I always use is my wife teaches in the junior high school. So she teaches 8th and 9th graders. And every year, inevitably, she'll have to help a student try and find a paper they've written or something like that. And they go back to try and find it and they've not named any files. Everything is untitled. They're used to their phones that just save everything as they go. So they never save their work. There's like all these problems, right? But we're so busy, or I think for many people, they think that young people are just so savvy and they just understand everything and, they get tech. And I think they forget those fundamental things that, the example I always use is just, I say that, these guys know, like speaking about my own 15-year-old, he understands how to run iOS and he could do it all day, but could he ever sit down and write iOS? I don't think so. And the problem is there's a fundamental gap between the people of sort of my generation and maybe a little older even, that were writing all this software and creating all these things. And if you grew up in an era when you were sort of crossing over from no internet to internet, there was a fair bit of like programming and stuff you had to kind of pick up if you wanted to be on the internet, right? So I think a lot of people our age have, some fundamental understanding about how things work and file structure and stuff like that, right? And I think for young people, they're missing all of that. And so I think to make the assumption that they would somehow be great is almost serving them poorly. And both of my kids, my 6th grader or 5th grader and my 15-year-old, both go to technology schools. They're Microsoft technology schools, and they go through a lot of cybersecurity type information. But even those guys, like they're still just, there's a lot missing.
Yeah, no, I think you make a brilliant point there because I've seen the same thing. And again, my background tends to be more computer science is what I'm degreed in, and electronics. So software and hardware, what's under the hood, I get a sense of it. Most people, though, that the average person or the average kid, especially, they're at a very high level. So they could work applications. They could create a PowerPoint that I'm kind of impressed with. My daughter showed me one yesterday. I was like, wow, that's really nice. Because I had to learn PowerPoint, taught myself. I'm not as good as she is.
Yeah, and she can do it on her phone while she's watching.
Yeah, doing it on the phone, this and that. And to your point, even I notice a lot of the kids, they're all given Chromebooks, at least in the school system in the town I'm in, and things automatically save this and that. And I've done some things, and I'm an Apple guy. I'm doing something on the Apple, and I'm like, oh, make sure you save the document when I'm showing my kids. And they're like, oh, it doesn't automatically save it for you? I'm like, no, why? Why, is yours? And they're like, oh yeah, we don't even bother with that. It doesn't, you make a change, it saves automatically. We don't have to think about it. That's the world of Google's. It is going between one world and another is very different. And we can take things for granted, I think. And regardless of what hardware platform, what software we have, there's got to be some understanding of a little bit more than just the surface level, I think. That's why education is so important. I'm always encouraging, especially a lot of the initiatives and things, because I've worked with different universities and schools and going and speak and talk, starting out when kids are like kindergarten, 1st grade, even though it's very basic, it really makes a difference when you're training them. And I don't mean they need to, have levels of cybersecurity certificates and education and things, but really the best practices. If you instill it then, as they go through school, and if they go on to technology school or college or whatever they're going to do in life, it's instilled in them. They think about security before they click or point or this or that, and it makes a big difference.
So you mentioned that you're an Apple guy, and
Yeah.
I'm curious if that has something to do with your background. There's the debate: Android, Apple, Microsoft. At Apple, like all the different types of computers and phones and everything out there. I've heard that Apple is more secure, but I've also heard that there's ways around everything. So
Yeah.
Is there one that, do you go with Apple because you feel it's more secure?
Combination of things. Apple, I think, started because with the family business, when it used to be out of our house in the mid 70s at that time, my father was addicted to Apple. I went back, I remember the year in 1977, 78 as a little kid going to meetings over at Rutgers, and it was an Apple Computer Club. And we'd go there and we would just share tips and things, and we'd build our own computers. You know, a computer back then, an Apple IIe or Apple II would have maybe 16K of memory.
Yeah.
It was like unheard of, the difference in hardware and software. And I started writing games and, low res, and learning what a pixel is, and writing stuff in BASIC. And then when I went to school, I was learning all the different codes, everything forth and up to C++, and now obviously Python and Linux and all the other things are going on. But back then I learned kind of old school technologies and things. And then my father worked also at Atari for a number of years. He was the VP of the research lab in New York City. So my life was surrounded by games, and that kind of really drew me in. So the world of Apple and Atari were everything to me. Did I have to work on PCs and learn and code and do things with that? Yeah, and I still have to. I don't love it. But to your point on the security side, overall, is Apple more secure? My gut would say yes. Is it 100% secure? Absolutely not. Is it targeted more now than it was before? Yeah, because there's more Apple product out there. I think cyber criminals look at it from this standpoint. They really don't care what you're using. They just go for the low-hung fruit. What's the easiest hack, what they can get into, what they can steal. So they're going to target all kinds of different iOS. They're going to target a PC. It doesn't really matter to them, I guess. Maybe the exception is I have more comfort and confidence using payment platform like Apple Pay. I really like it. That's one thing that's a standout to me. I know every digital wallet boasts, end-to-end encryption. I think Apple did a really good job. You don't hear of anybody being compromised using Apple Pay. And why is that? Because it is end-to-end encryption. So the software is encrypted, but it's also hardware encrypted. They've got a secure enclave component inside the actual phone. Now, anybody that's an Apple person knows you pay for it. It doesn't come for free. We're overpaying for the hardware and software to be part of that ecosystem. But with that, there is some security or perceived security that does come along with it. So I think it's important to realize that. So if I use my Apple Pay and go to the Mexican restaurant, I'm sending a one-time tokenized, encrypted transmission that goes through the payment ecosystem that basically contacts my issuing bank and says, hey, does this jive with it? Yeah, it does. And they hold my credit card information. So at no point am I transmitting my credit card information through the ecosystem, and hence it can't be compromised. To me, it's brilliant. It works. It's fast, it's efficient, and it's secure, but it's not available everywhere. That's part of the challenge. So everybody can't shift over to a true digital wallet yet. It was only in the early days of Apple Pay that there was a lot of hubbub about it's not secure, this and that. And that was really more at the issuing bank point. And what people were doing, cyber criminals, they would get a burner phone or an iPhone and someone's compromised bank account, and they would try to set up Apple Pay on the phone. And it didn't take there's no vetting done at the bank. And they'd say, yeah, I'm Scott Schober, and here's my phone, and here's the credit card. I want to set up Apple Pay. And the bank said, okay, what's your birth date? Okay, great. And they'd hook it up. That was where the compromise was, and that we heard a lot about the rumors and the insecure system. But I have not to date heard of a true breach in that digital wallet, the Apple Pay part. So I'm a big believer in it. I use it all the time. I feel real secure. And Google Wallets also, I've heard good things about that. I can't personally say I've used it and say it's as secure. I know it is software end-to-end encryption. I don't think they have the hardware component thought out as well as Apple does. But yeah, I'm a big believer in Apple stuff. Especially the other day was an Android I heard was compromised with some of the biometrics, which kind of scared me. Yeah. So as you dig into this and you look at a lot of the software and apps, and I love apps and games and all that stuff, obviously for phones, you can buy a lot of these things or download them from sources that are really not carefully vetting all the apps. So if you've got multiple spots, how can you keep on top of it? It's impossible. And plus, you got such a large user base of Android devices. To me, it's a very difficult task. Whereas Apple is stingy and tight, and it's got to go through a very careful, vetted process to make sure it is, checked off the box that it's secure and it's only sold or offered through their store. That gives them the controls of it. But again, Apple is selling hardware. Other companies, I think, often are selling hardware and software. So it's a very different formula, and it makes it difficult for competitors of Apple's environment to survive, I think.
I actually have the Apple Card.
Yeah. Yep.
And if you notice, there's something missing on it, and that's the credit card number.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
and that
no
to
credit
me
card
is,
number.
I love that. Just because, it's another layer, another step that prevents people from getting that information.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. And it is secure, and it's using near field communication, which again is secure. I think it's the future. We just got to get more people to adopt it and understand. Get that stupid mag stripe off the credit cards and get the card number off there. At least you have a fighting chance.
Yeah. So let's switch to mobile technology for a little bit. I get these random text messages that have no content. It's just a text message, and I'll get the same thing with emails. And the email will have this long email address, no subject, just empty. Is that a threat? What are they trying to accomplish with an empty text message or email? By opening it, or just usually if I see that, I just swipe left and delete it.
Yeah, and that's the best thing to do, especially if you're not expecting it or you see no content. I get that a lot, and I also get a lot of them with just a kind of a link there, an embedded, an SMS text with just a link, and your natural inclination is, if you're distracted, is to click on it. I think humans are just naturally, they click on everything. It's an email, it's an SMS text or whatever. There's a link there. I'm supposed to click on it for some reason. And I think that's the problem. People click on things, and that's what they're trying to do. If there's no content there, but it starts to open or opens automatically, depending upon the way you have it set, it could be something where it's dispensing some type of malware. It could just also be a bot just sending out crap. Don't know. There's so many things out there that I still scratch my head and say, what was the bad guy behind this? What are they trying to do? Are they targeting, I use AT&T. Are they just trying to flood AT&T with millions and millions of texts and find some unique way to get paid for it? Could be. There's actually a weird scam, and I only learned this through some research doing stuff about all these call bots, that in other countries, what they'll actually do is send out millions and millions of phone calls. These are bots, just computers talking, trying to get people to do things, this and that. And they actually keep statistics on that. So they send out millions of calls at a time through these giant, in a sense, like a call center, but they're really like a bot center. There's no people there, all these calls. And they're going out, coming from another country, internationally targeting the US. Why we all get constant robocalls driving us nuts. Do you realize that actually these guys, these criminals that are launching all of these things, are getting paid? And I said, how in the world could that happen? As I dug in, they create logs and statistics, and they sell that information back to the carriers.
Wow.
So you got criminals here launching all of these things. They're getting paid to send out all these robocalls, and they're getting, fractions of pennies, obviously, for every person that picks up and answers some stupid question. Some are legal, some are not. But they're getting paid for the statistics of it that they're feeding back to the carriers. That's absurd. And you wonder why there's such a problem with robocalls, and why people are so infuriated, because you get them and they're distracting and they're annoying. And sometimes they're tied in with criminal activity or scams or other things like that. But usually if you follow anything and see success to it, you follow the money. Just like I was always wondering, well, why would somebody be dumb enough to click on a spam email that's a phishing attack? And the more I did analysis on it, the more things I read about it, it's because it's so successful and it's so convincing, and people don't take the time to educate themselves. One stat I'd like to share is every single day, there's millions and millions of these junk emails that are launched at virtually no cost. And every day, more than 80,000 people click on that phishing attachment. every single day. And then it downloads whatever the malware, it could be a strain of ransomware or something else. Every single day, 80,000 people fall victim to it, despite all the things that everybody tries to say. Don't just click on it, do your research, check this, check that, check the raw header, so on and so forth. It's still every single day, 80,000 people. So why is it still happening? Because it works. Until it stops working, cyber criminals are going to continually do it. In fact, they'll increase the stuff. And you put in filters at the server and junk filters on your computer. You try everything under the sun. For yourself, it may be frustrating and you'll not click on it, but it's because 80,000 other people every single day are still clicking on it. That's the problem.
Yeah. So. Is there, I don't download my emails to my computer. I just open them in my browser and read them there.
Yeah.
Is that the right thing to do? Or people using Outlook and stuff like that, are they more compromised by doing that?
I think that's a good way that you do it. It's probably a better way than downloading it directly to your device, because some of the things, it depends how you have it configured. And again, what your email program is. There's lots of variables that come into play, but many people, they'll have it auto download, auto open, kind of, so they could actually look at it like a thumbnail and see it ahead of time. What's the content without doing it? And oftentimes in those cases, if there's an attachment and an auto executable or something, the problem already started before it's too late. A lot of the software, and again, I don't like to badmouth any company, but we always hear about all these, antivirus checkers and malware detection and so on and so forth. It does stop things. It's good to have. Most of the research and people I talk to, 15 to 20 something % of the stuff it stops. That's good. The bad part is that means 70 to 80% of it gets through. And I think that's where people don't realize you can't just count on it, because I get calls all the time from people. I got this ransomware thing on my computer. I don't understand how it happened. I got anti-malware and I got this and I got this software. Should I call them up and complain? I'm like, no, there's only so much you can do. You're taking some good steps, but just as important as having good software to stop some of that stuff is, updating the security patches on your OS and your applications and keeping up to date on those things. A lot of times we don't do that enough. I get updates from Apple all the time. And if I don't keep on top of that, guess what? I will fall victim. And I've had my machine compromised one time really severe. It took between 2 and 3 hours to just get it to work again. Recently, my father called, same thing. It was frozen, locked up, brand new machine, M1, this, that, couldn't even access it. Guess what? We all fall victim to it. So to your point, maybe, is Apple more secure? Statistically, probably yes. But you lower your chances of being a victim because it's a lower user base. As the market share starts to grow, I think they'll be targeted more, perhaps, and we'll be in the same boat.
So that's what I've always sort of assumed about Apple is just, it's a game of numbers, right? If you're trying to create as much chaos as you can, we'll do it to the hundreds of billions of PC users and leave the 3% of Apple users out of this.
Yeah. And I think too, to your point on that, how many things out there is PC so dominant? The world of Microsoft, and it's not just your desktop PC. Now you look outside it, look at the point of sale terminals, and look at ATMs, and look at things where Microsoft has got things integrated in it, yet people are not upgrading it, and it's because of the cost. They say, "Geez, I got 200 terminals I have to upgrade, or this particular hardware." But it's got an old legacy Windows operating system in it. So you don't blame them for that. It takes time and it takes money, and they're stuck. And then Microsoft cuts the cord and says, sorry, we don't have any updates. And again, not blaming Microsoft, but they are notorious for doing that, I think, as many other tech companies. They have kind of built-in end-of-life cycle. They want you to buy the new, 2020 operating system and computers and so on and so forth. So it's kind of difficult to stay up with technology for larger organizations without the spend. And that's, I think, fundamentally a challenge that there's no easy answer to.
Yeah. Now, this is not a political show nor a political question, but I wanted to talk to you just because you mentioned Anonymous had attacked you earlier in the show. And I think a lot of times when we talk about hacking and cybersecurity, we always think of them as being the bad guy, or them being Anonymous or hacker du jour, whoever it is. But, there's been a lot of stuff going around in the news lately about about, anonymous attacking in Russia, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we've got the Russian-Ukraine thing going on. And, I think largely the sentiment of people is that, Ukraine was attacked and maybe shouldn't have been. That political discussion can be saved for another show or a different show.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm curious about is, I guess hacking for good, or hacking for, what people are signing off on, right? So right now everybody's going, oh, this is great. They're going in and they're destroying all this Russian ecosystem, and they're hacking into systems, and you're knocking all this stuff down, right? And it's almost like Robin Hood or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Virtuous. When if these guys were doing this to anybody else at any other time, you'd be like, oh my God, they're the enemy. Like, how do we do this, right?
Yeah.
And so I just wondered if you had a take on sort of anonymous and, other hacker organizations. Obviously, they're maybe the most well-known. But in terms of, can hacking be used for good, or is it strictly for evil?
Hacking could definitely be used for good. Most of the time it is used for evil, I think. And again, it's hard with this because it is a political argument. Obviously, anybody that would say, hey, you're with, the US or any NATO ally would say what Anonymous did is great. That's fabulous. Is it wrong? Well, yeah, I guess what they're doing when they're trying to take down and target banks and other types of things that, you shouldn't do, it's not right. I mean, one could argue also, well, was it appropriate? Again, this is from a non-political side, but looking at it from technically, was it appropriate when the US and Israel targeted back in, the days of Stuxnet to take down the centrifuge for Iran and stop the nuclear enrichment? Obviously, those countries or any allies would argue, sure, it should be okay. And it was done for the greater good of man and stop them from, building nuclear bombs. And it set them back a few years. But obviously, from their side, they could probably say that's an act of war. That was the start of cyber war. That's wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's the pickle we're in right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you're on sort of what feels like sort of global sentiment from, an American living in the US, hearing US news about this, feels like global sentiment is largely in the favor of the Ukrainians, and they feel, I don't know, I think it's sort of a David and Goliath story.
Yes,
that's why it's so sexy for people.
Yeah.
But
the underdogs keeping up the fight and going against the big bad bully. Yeah.
And I think that's sort of been Anonymous's rap too, right? We're really revealing information for whistleblowers. We're doing these sort of, Robin Hood-esque things, right? Yeah. So this is a storyline that, has existed among people forever. And so, but I always think about, or I try or objectively, I'm looking at what's happening right now with these attacks within Russia and all that stuff, and going, well, I mean, if they can do it there, they could do it anywhere. Right. And so at what point do you not want to sanction this? Because sure, maybe in this instance, they're being good actors, or some people may consider them as good actors. But what's it take to make them, come down on the wrong side of your political ideology and then, switch up the whole thing. So I think it's curious, especially with you as a cybersecurity expert. I'm just curious to get the perspective, because I think it's easy to get caught up in the romantic notion of what's happening. But I'm curious about just sort of, how the reality of things are.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if I had to make it a black or white issue, if it's wrong, it's wrong. Because if one was to say, hey, they should use everything in their power, for example, the United States to launch cyber attacks, or a group like Anonymous against Russia, go for it. It'll better their beliefs and their cause. But there's a scary side to that, because it also sends the message to people in general, be it a hacktivist, a cyber criminal, the kid hacking, that I guess it's okay to do these type of things. Is it okay if I get a bad grade in my high school final to do a DDoS attack on the school? Well, why not? That's what somebody starts to rationalize those things. I'm not going in with a gun and shooting someone. America's not going over to Russia and shooting anyone with a bullet or blowing things up. But you're using cyber tools as warfare. So there's a lot of fine line there. And it is probably a lot of different types of arguments that come into play. But I think either way, it looks like a cyber war has already started, in my opinion, because obviously we hear about a lot of attacks that China initiates against the United States and other countries, that Russia initiates, or the state-sponsored hacks. Do you ever hear about reports of the United States launching any type of cyber attacks? Not a whole lot. Do you think it's happening? Absolutely. Maybe the closest revelations of some of the things we've heard, and again, I'm not saying I'm for or against, but the Snowden type of revelations that came out helps us to understand a little bit more about how delicate national security is, at what lengths people will go with national security. We've seen some of the things and the challenges, because again, our customer base, we sell to the DoD community. We sell black boxes, we sell espionage tools, spy tools. So we do cross a lot of different paths with some of our customers and some of the technology that we do develop. And it's very difficult. I try to focus on the technology, not the politics, not the government agencies and things like that. And it is a very fine line, because it's probably safe to say that all countries and all governments step over the line often, whether it's legal or it's unlawful. I guess that's for the courts to decide or the governments to decide, and they got to work it all out. But they all use technology to their advantage. It's just not talked about that much. And is that an advantage in a cyber war? Absolutely. In espionage? Absolutely. In national security? Absolutely. So I think those that are the most technologically advanced tend to be the strongest from a government standpoint these days.
Well, and I think that's always been the case, right? I mean, the first army with a tank, or the first army with an airplane, or the first army with whatever.
They've got an advantage.
Right? I mean, it's the advantage. And, in today's playing field, it happens to be, cyber or technology. And, that just happens to be the latest tank or the latest whatever, So I think I think you make a good point there.
Yeah. And obviously it's probably a little biased, but in a general sense, the United States tends to use cybersecurity as more of a defensive posture. They're not doing things as offensively as other countries. And that's politically safe to say, I think. So we don't see these hardened attacks causing chaos. When you look at something like the Colonial Pipeline.
Wasn't that two-factor authenticate? I can't even say it.
Yeah.
Wasn't that all because they didn't have two-factor set up?
Yeah.
That's why they were able to hack that?
When you have remote connectivity into something that's kind of critical infrastructure and you don't enable two-factor authentication, old legacy systems, it was a problem. The success story of it, I always like to point to, they made a lot of bumbles along the way. And you could probably look at every major breach from Target to JP Morgan. Most of those were some type of third-party remote access, no multi-factor authentication. In each case, as you dig in and uncover and unpeel that onion, you realize, oh, geez, it's kind of embarrassing. Nobody wants to talk about this. But those are the realities of these things. The security that we can actually control as humans, we're too complacent and we don't do it. So convenience allows us to take the shortcuts always, which results in something that could be billions upon billions of dollars in damage. And that's the part to me that's kind of the unforgivable and so frustrating. And again, I was guilty of this in the past too. And many companies today still are. And what happens post-breach, you look at JP Morgan, where they commit, $500 million towards security upgrades and improvement. I'm saying, geez, they already are probably the most secure bank in the world. Yet they committed that much more towards cybersecurity. So what does it tell me? Well, they have the right mindset, because you got to train people, you got to upgrade, you got to constantly be improving your security to stay up one step ahead of everybody else. And that's part of the problem. It is a cat and mouse game, this entire conversation about cybersecurity. If you do everything right and get it right every time, you realize, well, nothing's 100%, so you can't get it right every time. But the bad guys just got to get it right that one time to find that vulnerability to exploit and get in there. They got you. So even though, you do all these things, doesn't mean you're 100% safe. But man, you're 99% more safe than the guy next door that's done nothing. So I think when you look at it, like to your point before, it's a numbers game. That's kind of what cybersecurity in general is. You don't want to be that statistic, that 1% of a person that did nothing and got breached and compromised, because you're going out of business, or it's expensive to clean up the mess and the notifications and your customer base and so on and so forth. It's a nightmare.
So before we end this conversation, I just want to say one more thing about that I do for my personal sanity is I have 2 hard drives, and I keep one out of office, out of the building, out of on its own thing, just so that if anything ever did happen, if I got a ransomware attack, if I got anything weird that's like, we're gonna lock your computer and hold all your data hostage, I have a backup. And I usually have a 4 to 6 month reminder on my phone where it tells me go and update again, and then switch the hard drives out, because I've got all my music catalog, I've got everything that I've done for my entire career on hard drives, and I have 2 of them, and I rotate them out. So just simple stuff like that could potentially save you a lot of headache down the road. Scott,
I would add one more point to that. If it can be immutable, which means you can't modify it or delete it if someone ever did get their hands on it, it's a good way to back up information. I forget the statistic I read. I don't know what it was exactly, but something like, I think it was 28% of all backups don't work and can't be restored because people did something in the process incorrectly. So I think it's important when you back up your data, do it right. Have a system like you have. If it's every 6 months that works for you, that's brilliant. Keep it disconnected so it's not accessible through the internet or connected directly to your computer continuously. I think that's brilliant. And if you could make it immutable where somebody can't go in there and actually modify or delete it, that's just a plus, especially in a corporation type environment, because if you get ransomware on your backup and it's done through the cloud, it starts to be a cat and mouse game again, and you can't really recover from it very successfully.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll actually keep that in mind for the next time. Can you tell us where people can go to find you and reach out and maybe buy your books if they're wanting to learn more?
Absolutely. Well, certainly Amazon is the easiest source for anybody's books. All 3 of mine are up there. Hacked Again, Cybersecurity is Everybody's Business, Senior Cyber. And I do always encourage people, please, if you do buy it, first of all, thank you, but give me an honest review. Let me know the good and the bad so I can improve, hopefully, as a writer. If they want to find more about myself or speaking engagements, some of the stuff I'm involved in, free e-papers and tips I share, it's all on my website, scottschober.com. And then my company's website with all of our security tools is simply B as in boy, V as in Victor, and then systems.com, bvsystems.com. Feel free to jump on there. And again, there's lots of e-papers and things that we provide that's really just educating and knowledge, which I think is really important in this industry of cybersecurity and wireless.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Scott. This has been a really enlightening conversation. Obviously, there's a million rabbit holes here where you could spend a lot of time, but I would encourage anybody who's got anything important on your computer, you ought to probably learn a little bit more than you already know about cybersecurity. So check out the books, check out the website, and do some educating. It's really important. So thanks so much, Scott. We really appreciate having you here.
Yes, thank you guys, and stay safe, everyone.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who listens to the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.